Good morning, ladies, gentlemen, members of the House of Lords and the House of Commons. We have hopefully a very interesting discussion for you this morning, which is the third in our series of health webinars. The first with Virgin Care, looking at the People Plan. The second looking at the reforms of the White Paper with the Independent Health Providers Network, Health Service Journal and Policy Exchange. This is our third, which is being mounted for on behalf of the Urology Trade Association, which I have the honour to chair, as well as to provide its public affairs advice. My name is Chris Whitehouse, and I am chair, founder, and director of health and social care policy at Whitehouse Communications. Got the name right, we changed it yesterday. So Whitehouse Communications is the new name. Today we're going to be looking at medical device regulation in the future, now that we've A, left Brexit, B, passed the Medicines and Medical Devices Act, and C, are moving for legislation to reform the NHS. To help us trudge our way through this landscape, we have three participants today on your panel. We have Graeme Tunbridge, who is the Director of Devices at the MHRA. We have Anne-Marie Morris, MP, for Newton Abbot and chair of the all-party parliamentary group on access to medicines and medical devices. And we have Peter Bullen, the chief executive officer of Bullen Healthcare. On the line, we have many medical device companies. We have regulators, people from the Department of Health and Social Care, from NICE, from the NHRA, and a wide range of health policy experts. So we're grateful to you all for tuning in today. We are keeping microphones off, generally speaking, because the acceptance list was 75 people, which is rather too many to have a free-for-all discussion. So if you do have questions for later on, do feel free to put them in the chat function on your screens, and we'll put them to the panelists, get as many in as we can. Just so you know, we are recording this session, video and sound, and it will be available on our website and on the website of the UTA, and indeed anybody else who wants to link to it after the event. So without further ado, let me just turn to our panel with a very simple question each. Peter, you're in the business of developing and supplying medical devices. What are your priorities for regulation in this field now as we move forward? You're on mute.
Am I unmuted?
You are.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Well, as a member of the UTA, I think it would be right to say that the UTA supports a position of close regulatory alignment with the EU in the terms of its regulatory policy. We would encourage the MRA to work closely with international partners to harmonise standards, to avoid increased bureaucracy for the civil service and for the manufacturers. Regulatory divergence could increase duplication of work, decrease competitiveness, and increase our operating costs. Inconsistencies in regulatory policy between the UK and elsewhere could burden manufacturers of urology products. So effective international regulatory cooperation and harmonisation should be a policy-making priority. Similarly, to ensure the continued approval of medical devices/medical products in the UK from elsewhere, the UK recommends close collaboration in the UK, thus ensuring that there's no disruption in obtaining new and innovative urology products for patients. The UTA would welcome any guarantees of the continued smooth distribution of goods and services between the EU and the UK. To maintain the continuous flow of medical devices into the UK, there needs to be minimal disruption at ports and checkpoints into the UK. Urology products are essential for users to maintain a quality of life, and there are potentially serious personal health consequences if users do not receive their products on time. And I think that sort of puts the position, Chris, of the UTA and its members.
Graeme, as the regulator's voice here today, the man whose inbox will be filled with all the problems if they do emerge, how do you respond to that? What's the MHRA going to do to balance the need to have flexibility for innovation and development, whilst guaranteeing at the same time the free flow, smooth transit of products coming into the country, but also going through your licensing regime?
Shall I wrap that up with the question that you're going to ask me, Chris? If that's probably going to be easier, and I hope you don't mind me taking up the next 53 minutes of the webinar answering the question. So you flashed up the question. I'll just crack on an answer, I think, and I'll try and come to the question that you pose at the end of it. If you don't think I've covered it, then pull me up on it. So I think, as I was thinking about the priorities, I think that the first priority that we had was to, if you like, keep the lights on the 1st of January. It's quite easy to forget what a seismic shift it was leaving the EU, and all the work that went up into preparing for that, all the legal work that was done, all the operational work that was done to make sure that from the transition from the 31st of December to the 1st of January, that we could still ensure that supply of products, that UK companies could still supply to the UK and to Europe. I've never been so nervous about an IT system since the potential millennium bug in 1999-2000 as it was when the MHRA new registration system that we've got was being switched on the 1st of January. I mean, what a day to choose to do it. But sure enough, we've managed to put in place a new registration system, and we're starting to get through thousands and thousands of products being registered with the MHRA for the first time. So we're starting to get this picture of products on the market in the UK, and that's been reflective of the approach that we've taken. We want to continue the supply of products. We want to continue to maintain levels and increase levels of patient safety, and we want to do what we can to support UK businesses as far as possible. So the first priority was keeping the lights on, and I think we've done a pretty reasonable job of that. There are complications. Northern Ireland brings its own complications, of course, and we're working through some issues there. But I think we've done a pretty good job of that immediate jolt. So I think that sets the foundation for where we want to go beyond. So for the next 2.5 years, obviously we're in what we're calling the standstill period, where there are a couple of routes to market in the UK. You can carry on using CE marked products, or the UKCA mark is an alternative route based on the European directives that have been transposed into UK law. So that's going to be the situation for the next 2.5 years. And obviously that's not a very long period of time. And after July 2023, there is then the question about, well, what comes next? What does the future world look like? How does market access to the UK operate post July 2023? I can't answer that question in perhaps as much detail as anyone would like at the moment, and part of the reason for that is that we're still working through some of the really key policy questions that we need to work through, really. We've got the Medicines and Medical Devices Act. We'll probably be talking about that in a little bit more detail later on, that provides that basis for us to put together more legislation. It's then defining, well, how can we ensure, and I think the principles that I described earlier are a pretty good basis to work off, which is ongoing supply of products, safeguarding increasing patient safety, supporting UK business. I guess the other one is always the innovation question. How can we think about how the UK landscape can support innovation? And maybe I'll talk about that in a little bit. I promise I won't take 53 minutes, Chris. Just a couple more minutes, and then I'll allow you to move on. So I think that, reflecting on some of the points that Peter made, I think some of the principles that we're looking at when it comes to the future is, what does international alignment look like? How can the UK start to fit into that international picture? So we're now observers at the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. We're observers on the Medical Device Single Audit Programme. So we got that together pretty quickly this year, which I was really, really pleased about. And those are obviously key fora for having those discussions and for aligning with regulators internationally. So that's a key aspect of it. Obviously, there's the future relationship with the EU, but also the future relationship with other partners globally as well. And that kind of links to the INDRF, but there are specific trade agreements being sought based on the principles of, well, where can we get mutual recognition? How can we ensure that UK regulatory approval is recognised elsewhere, and vice versa? How can we start to build that into the system? So I think it's fair to say that that international dimension is going to be an absolutely key part of the future system. You know, it's the UK, you know, we are a relatively small player globally. You've got the kind of the big four jurisdictions, US, EU, China, Japan, that kind of have their own systems, and everyone else in some way, shape or form kind of draws off them. And I think we're going to be in a similar position. Equally, we will be developing the UK route to market. So the UK approved bodies, as they now are, so they were the notified bodies based in the UK, have transitioned to UK approved bodies. We're looking to expand the number of approved bodies we've got. There's lots of interest. People want to come and do that work in the UK. We want to think about how a UK specific route to market can do some things in a slightly different way. What products are there where the current regulatory framework in the European sense or international sense isn't quite fit for purpose? What can we do there a bit differently? And a couple of those scream out to us. Software is a great example. Just finally coming back on the innovation point, and I think that's one where there are lots of things happening across the UK healthcare system more generally, that where we have to try and think about how can we link into that broader framework to support access, early access to devices that are going to improve patient outcomes, to innovations that are going to bring better outcomes to patients. How can we get them to patients earlier, but get them to patients in a way that they can be sure about the safety, the performance of the products, and what those are going to bring? And how can we pull on some of the things that are coming through? Really good example in the Medicines and Medical Devices Act is the Medical Device Information System being built. That's going to provide some key data linkages that will allow us to really understand some of the long-term safety profile and performance of products, particularly implanted products. I'll pause there. I could go on for another 47 minutes, but I won't.
Okay, that can come in part two. It's going to be a box set, I feel. But let's turn to Anne-Marie. What impact do you think the Integration and Innovation White Paper is going to have on the UK's medical device regulatory system?
Chris, good question. And I think there is one very simple answer. Sadly, not a lot. I honestly think it is a huge missed opportunity. I think that for me, there are at least two parts, if you like, in this landscape. One is, if you like, the regulation which relates to safety, which is really the domain of the MHRA. And if you like, the other part of the regulatory system is about the true access. It's the commissioning to ensure we actually get the uptake. Now, the Medicines and Medical Devices Act dealt with the first bit, and we will, I'm sure, debate that in greater depth in a minute. But this new white paper, which will lead to the Health and Care Act, is really much more focused on the commissioning bit. And what I find really strange is that there is nothing in there other than reference to a medicines directory about medicines and devices. Well, if you've got a white paper leading to a Health and Care Act bit of legislation, which is supposed to be ensuring the triple aim, better health and well-being, better quality of health services, sustainable use of NHS resources, then surely medicines and devices ought to be baked into that. And we know that there are some huge challenges with regard to the devices landscape, and it's going to be increasingly important we get this right. So if we look first of all, and this is probably the challenge that Graeme's going to face at the first stage, ensuring we actually do get safe devices available on the market, properly regulated, but in a way that ensures we get them to market quickly. I think it's clear that the diversity of the devices landscape is huge and growing exponentially. And therefore, much has to be done to specifically improve and address the differences needed in the way that we regulate AI straightforward, medtech. And I mean, I could go on, and more will come down the line. And I think for Graeme and the MHRA, the question is, how are we going to actually do more than tweak the system to make sure it's not just fit for purpose, but actually we are setting the lead for the future? Because I think in my book, while I hear the call for alignment and absolutely agree the message for avoiding duplication and reducing cost, actually, I would like to see the UK taking a real lead here. And I'm delighted that the MHRA are doing so much work with international bodies. And I think to the bodies that they've referred to, I would add Excite, which is a body based in Canada, which are looking at working with people that develop devices along with regulators around the world to try to help those at the very early stages of innovation actually get the way they are innovating and the evidence they are producing right, to ensure there is swifter approvals across a number of different countries. And that, I think, is the way to go. And I think they are actually likely to come up with a very good template internationally, which hopefully we as the UK would drive, but also adopt. Looking at the piece around real access, commissioning, and how we ensure that's done better. Right now, as you well know, it's frankly all over the place. I really feel for those involved in this space. It is very hard because there is no specific commissioning system per se within what will be this new integrated health care system. It's completely opaque as to what this new integrated commissioning landscape is going to look like, what the new ICSs are going to be empowered to do. And it's a real missed opportunity, because if we don't fix that bit, it really doesn't matter how brilliant Graeme and the MHRA are at getting these things authorised. If we can't actually get them to patients, then we've got a real problem. And that is the challenge for the government, for NHS England, but also for NICE, because it's clear that they're kind of in this space, aren't they? Because they are between the is it safe and fit for purpose, and does it do what it says on the tin, and actually the patient getting hold of it, because inevitably the patient getting hold of it is about, can we afford it? And so I think there is a piece of work which, so far as I'm aware, and maybe in questions, one of the NICE representatives will come back on this, what are NICE doing to look at a new way of addressing how we pay for devices? Because the current system, frankly, doesn't work. And it seems to me it's a very big opportunity, and one that could actually make us very attractive as a market for developing devices. We're already, in my view, an international leader here. Way to go. Thanks, Chris.
Well, we'll come to Peter in a minute about the commissioning point and access to patients. But Graeme, there were a couple of questions in there directly for you. How are you going to make sure that this isn't just a minor tweak and a missed opportunity? What's the MHRA's thinking on this, and what are you going to be recommending to ministers?
I mean, as ever, Anne-Marie, I always enjoy hearing you talk, because you join some dots in a really nice way, and you're right to pose the challenge. I'm glad that to some extent I was able to preempt what you said, because I think you're right. What we don't want to do is we don't want to erect this regulatory pillar as the MHRA and kind of make it a perfect regulatory system and kind of, clap our hands, pat ourselves on the back and say, well, we've done our job, isn't that jolly good? The regulations are ideal, because actually that is as you say, it's a complete missed opportunity, and it's also it doesn't exploit what the UK can offer to people that want to bring devices to market. And like I said, I always boil this down to patient outcomes. It's about making sure that the best devices can get to patients as early as possible, and that we have the right systems and processes in place to track them, to make sure that they're continuing to perform as we expect they should do. So the joining up question is absolutely key. It's key from facilitating uptake into clinical trials so that we're generating high quality data, through to making sure that regulation that builds into regulation, and then that evidence piece builds into the broader, what do I need to do to persuade commissioners or whoever is doing the paying in the future system that this device is actually useful, and then making sure that where good practice does happen, that then expands in more widely in NHS, because the innovation challenge does tend to happen in the post regulatory space. I think one interesting point that you raised as well, Anne-Marie, was around the what I would call the kind of the innovation gap. And it's the early advice, it's the people that have some great ideas, but just really struggle to know what to do. And it's one of the issues where the EU system is busy shooting itself in the foot, because they're busy saying notified bodies, you can't engage with manufacturers early, you can't provide any advice, you just have to be the kind of, you know, the markers of the homework or the exam right at the end of it. It's almost like saying, go and do an exam, but you don't have a teacher beforehand. So there is this increasing gap in the EU. And I think we've got an opportunity to say, well, in the future UK system, how can we make sure that where innovators want to come and have a discussion about what does a sensible, effectively evidence generation pathway through regulation, and hey, let's get nice in the room and talk about ongoing access and kind of value for money aspects as well, then actually you have a really persuasive offer. So if we can crack that doesn't just talk about the regulatory pillar, it talks about the whole landscape, then we'll be looking pretty good. It's not an easy thing to do. This has been talked about for many years. But I think that actually with the Medicine and Medical Devices Act, if we can do maybe some more with the Health and Care Act, then maybe there's an opportunity here that is fairly unique, and maybe we will crack it this time.
I think that's a very interesting distinction between the mindsets of the European Union and the MHRA there, because my experience, as yours appears to be, is that the European Union regulatory system is there to say no, 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 until you can tick all their boxes. Whereas I've always found engagement with the MHRA is sort of no but or yes but, and how about this but? And that helps you get the product or the device through the system much better. But Peter, both our other panelists have mentioned the importance of the consumer, the patient, consumer, and how to get a new product the exposure it needs within the new NHS. What's your fears about that? Is it going to be a barrier, or is it going to be a smooth transition, or do we simply not know yet?
Well, speaking personally, I don't know as yet. What I am concerned about, though, is the fact that dispensing appliance contractors, many of whom are members of UTA, rely heavily on the drug tariff to supply product to patients. I think I'd have to take issue with Anne-Marie. I think the system we have at the moment works extremely well within the drug tariff, and has been proven to work extremely well during the past 12 months where we've been suffering from COVID. To the best of my knowledge, something in the region of 400,000 patients have had their urology products delivered to them in time, in full, when they want them. And therefore, I think the system, even when it's being put at its highest strain level, hasn't creaked, but has indeed supplied the service that I would want for my granny if she required a catheter or a leg bag or a night drainage bag or something. And so I think the system we have working in the UK at this point in time, in the form of the drug tariff, is a super efficient way of getting product at a good value for the payer, the NHS, and me, the taxpayer, in good quality to the patient, and to the patient in time. One of the concerns I have at this point is that as a manufacturer, a lot of these products are classified as Class 1 products, and the manufacturer of the product within the UK, to the best of my knowledge, it hasn't changed, can self-certificate. This means that they can get new products applied to be put on and placed on the market within the drug tariff by means of self-certification. A lot of the urology products that are supplied are, in inverted commas, commodity products. They're not being used for open heart surgery or anything like that. If you supply a faulty leg drainage bag, no one's going to die. And I think the current system works extremely well. I would like to see that if we are entering into a new era, then the lessons of the past are firmly learned, and no sophisticated method of getting a quality marked product onto the market is going to delay such a process. Currently, to apply to the NHS, VSA, NHS England, to put a product onto drug tariff, it requires a CE mark. In the future, we're going to change that mark, but I would hope the method of obtaining the new mark isn't any more complex and complicated than it currently is.
Very clear answer there from you, Peter. But Anne-Marie, Peter's brought up the pandemic. We must talk about the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. It's put every aspect of our health service, our medical device supply chain, our drug device supply chain under the biggest stress test, short of a nuclear holocaust, that it could ever be under. And it hasn't been found wanting. That isn't to say there aren't many things that we've learned and that can be improved. But what do you think we can learn about this in the particular context of supplies getting through to your constituents, NHS and social care patients?
I think, Chris, for me, there's quite a broad answer to this question, and it's in a number of different bite-sized chunks, if you like. Because I think if I can just refer back to what Peter was talking about, he's talking about ensuring that existing manufacturing, production, supply lines, etc., carry on working even under stress. And I can absolutely hear what he says, that in that sense, the drug tariff worked extremely well. I think what I would say is that's actually quite a small part of the devices, if you like, agenda. And I think the bit that you've not referred to, Peter, is the bit about innovation, the bit about AI, the bit about more complex med tech, because it seems to me that there are issues around ensuring we get an appropriate system which enables innovation quickly but safely, as well as the piece you're talking about, which is, if you like, once it's been approved, ensuring the supply. And both are clearly important, although just a heads up, that drug tariff and the overall tariff system is being reviewed as part of this white paper and ultimately the Health and Care Act. So I'm sure you'll be watching with interest where it goes from here. But if you like, in terms of COVID and how we have perceived our response and what lessons we've learned from it, I think for me, one of the more interesting ends is actually the innovation end, because we had the call for the new ventilators. There was a call for so many new devices, med tech, the use of technology in the way that we supported patients with very acute health needs. And it's that bit which I think I was very impressed with the way the MHRA responded, because I think compared to other countries, frankly, we were quicker. I think the MHRA did a much better job of looking at their systems and processes, looking at the issues around real world evidence, around exactly how trial processes would work. They took the lead in talking to regulators around the world to ensure, because this was an international problem, not a national one, that we actually, I think, came out ahead of the game. So for me, the lessons learned are never be complacent, always recognize there'll be a challenge down the road, be prepared, not only to respond, but be prepared to do some, if you like, scenario planning, look at what the health problems coming down the road might be, because the next one won't be COVID, it'll be something else, but we need to have that in our sights. So I think that sort of planning is crucial. And I think probably the final lesson for me is the need to ensure that we have sustainability and resilience baked into the system at all levels. So that's baked into, if you like, the innovation process and enabling speed to market when we are in a pandemic situation. But it's also, if you like, the hands-on access. So it's the commissioning, it's the tariff, etc. How do we ensure that that works efficiently and effectively? And it seems to me, therefore, it's look forward, be prepared to change, and be prepared not to lose what we have experienced going forwards. Instead, we risk going backwards. I don't think that Graeme or anybody else is going to do that, but that's the risk. So for me, great lessons to be learned. We mustn't lose them.
Very good points. In adversity and challenge, there is innovation, development, but only where there's flexibility to adapt in a rapid circumstance. I think it was helpful clarification. The drug tariff is a very good starting point, but it's what happens before and after the drug tariff that really makes the difference. But Graeme, if we come back to you, we talked about the Medicines and Medical Devices Act. That was thrown at me and said, Chris, can you come up with some amendments on that by one of my contacts in the House of Lords? And I looked at the sheer length of it and I thought, oh, I can't, this is going to take me a week or two. And then I actually started reading it. It was one of the most simple pieces of legislation I've ever seen. The authorities will have powers to do A, B, C, D, E, F, etc. By secondary legislation. So it's just a big enabling piece of legislation. Now, I know that was a subject of some debate in the House of Lords as to whether these were Henry VIII's powers, whether sufficient scrutiny was built in, but basically the government got what it wanted, and the authorities now have all these flexible powers to bring forward regulation. How are they going to use that new framework, that new system, to facilitate product development, not just allow it, but facilitate and encourage it? I think that's what Marie was getting at in large part there, that we don't want you just regulate it. We want you to facilitate and help the innovators. How are you going to do that whilst balancing that against patient safety in practice?
You're posing one of the kind of the imponderables that we kind of we always come back to is the safety versus innovation question. I try and look at it not as kind of two opposing forces, if you like. I think that the two are actually very closely related. And when you think about things in terms of how can the MHRA support better patient outcomes, then actually I think when you enter that kind of mindset as to what's a regulator here to do, then I think it's a bit easier to imagine how safety and innovation do actually go hand in hand. Let me take an example. So I'll go back to your previous question, because there are some really good examples of that very thing happening. So Anne-Marie, you mentioned ventilators. So obviously the MHRA we don't license products on the medical devices side. Medical devices, we pretty much exclusively operate in the post-market space. We do safety investigations aspect of it. But all of a sudden we had to flip around and say, right, we're going to enter a pre-market space because these ventilators are going to be developed in very fast time. They're not going to be able to be CE marked, so we need to get it through the emergency approval process. And we normally, in any given year, we do fewer than half a dozen of those. In previous years, it's where there's some sort of supply issue and we need to, and it's relatively straightforward. But we had to kind of reimagine our role in that space. So over the course of the weekend, my team put together some technical specifications for ventilators based on, an anaesthetist talking so-and-so and just kind of getting it together. And by the Monday, we kicked it around and said, you know what, this is good enough. We published it. Up it went. Version 1, this will change, but this gives you a guiding principle on which to go on. We then put in place a series of, if you like, kind of support mechanisms to say, if you're thinking about working towards this, then here's how we're going to support you to be able to meet the various aspects that you need to do. So for people that were entirely new to it, we spoke to the UK notified bodies as they were then, BSI and SGS being the main ones, and we said, right, we really want you to stand up some of your auditors to get out there to do some QMS work in the midst of an early pandemic. How's it, so we put in place all of these things, and it's just about thinking completely differently about how you need to work and operate to to get things through. And you know, the outcome of the ventilator challenge was a fantastic result, and it was genuinely one of the most rewarding things that I've ever worked in, because to see the collaboration, to see the work that came of it, and to see the underpinning role that my team played in it, made me very proud. But there are some principles there that you really draw on. It's openness and transparency is a really important one. And if you're clear about what you're doing it, how you're doing it, the criteria that you're applying to it, if you can put in place technical specifications, target product profiles, whatever you want to call them, people have a clear framework. They understand what they're working towards. This flexibility is going to be absolutely key. So the way in which the MHRA and the approved bodies work in future is not going to look like the notified body system. Yes, there'll be conformity assessment bodies, but it'll be much more of a partnership. And we'll be able to do that because we'll have that one-on-one relationship with the bodies in the UK. One of the questions that we're looking at addressing is, okay, how does market access work? Is it completely something that's going to be run through the approved bodies? Is it going to be something that's done in-house by the MHRA? Is it somewhere in between the two? And we don't know the answer to that. We're working through that at the moment, and we'll be consulting later in the year to kind of ask some of those questions. But I quite like the idea that we don't have the answer, because flexibility is going to be key. And actually, it doesn't really matter. We apply transparent standards. Here's what you need to meet. Here's how you're going to be assessed. Here's the timescales that you're going to be assessed, that will apply to that particular assessment. And actually, that gives everyone the certainty that you need. You pair that with the transparency and openness that I spoke about, and I think you have quite a persuasive offer. Going back to very quickly what Peter and Anne-Marie spoke about. Peter, I like your term commodity products. I think MHRA in the future world, we're not interested in rewriting rules for the products where you just need to get them through onto the market, where the commodity products, they're just there, they're doing a job. Where we need to focus is what you described, Anne-Marie. It's AI, it's software, it's diagnostics. It's the space where we know that innovation is happening, where we know that there is rapid product iteration, where we know that the regulations probably are starting to fall behind already. So how can we use the flexibility in the Medicines and Medical Devices Act that you described, Chris? How can we put in place statute, secondary legislation, statute, but also have guidance that can be flexible, use standards, use other mechanisms to be able to build on that. So I'll boil it down. We'll be flexible. And I think there's a prize there, but the Medicines and Medical Devices Act is a really, really important underpinning bit of legislation to support us to do that.
Graeme, I think your enthusiasm for flexibility is infectious. It's not often we come across regulators and government officials who are excited about the potential of a situation, as opposed to carrying on doing it the same way we've always done it. That's really good. I have one specific question from the audience. If I just come to this one, can Graeme and the panel comment on the product registration and UKRP progress and experiences within the UK regulatory system ahead of the 1st of May deadline?
So, I mean, I can talk about it from my perspective. So just for anyone that may not be familiar, obviously, so this is the first deadline, is the deadline by which all of the higher risk devices and IVDs have to be registered with the MHRA. So this is one of the things that we brought in after the 1st of January, reflected, and actually I can try and cover off the other question as well that came through. Obviously, operating as a standalone regulator brings its own challenges. When you're part of the EU system, you're used to working with a number of other member states, and when a safety issue comes up, you talk to the member state where the manufacturer is based, and so on and so forth. And we've had to completely work out how to operate as a standalone regulator. So actually having a picture of all the products on the market is a really important underpinning factor of that. So I spoke about the fact that the system has stood up well. We've got, I can't remember what the latest count of registration is in. We've got it's in the 5-figure digits of products being registered with us. I think I'm not exaggerating there. The system seems to be working well. There are always teething problems. There are always things that we can improve. But as government IT projects go, I think this is one where we can hand on heart say actually we're pretty pleased with how it's gone. The experience seems to be pretty good. UKRP, so this is the UK responsible person. It's another. This is the other key thing that we brought in, is that manufacturers have to have the UKRP base in the UK. Again, there have been questions about it. People have been trying to work out what that looks like, but actually the requirements are relatively straightforward, and I don't think that we've seen any major problems or blockages there. Obviously, one of the principles that we'll continue to work towards is one in which if someone hasn't registered their products by May the 1st, they're not going to be served with a legal notice on May the 2nd and have my ex-policeman knocking on their door on May the 3rd. You know, it'll be a case of supporting, here's what you need to do, get the compliance going, and any formal action will come further down the line.
Indeed, you mentioned your ex-policeman. I've met some of them wearing another hat, where certain herbal remedies and food supplements were brought in from America without due approvals and with some awful dodgy container ingredients in. So we briefed them and sent them to sort out the little problem. But Anne-Marie, I'll come to Peter in a minute for a manufacturer's perspective on all that. But Anne-Marie, you were welcoming some of that by your body language. What's your response?
Well, I think all credit to Graeme and the team. I think they've done a fantastic job getting to where they've got to. But I think for me, it's where we go from here. And I think Graeme will recognise this. One of the things that came in with the Medicines and Medical Devices Act was the power to create a proper database. But the point of it was not just to have whatever it is, be it a device or something more complex, registered. It was about the data that you collect and the power that having that data gives to answer all sorts of post-market authorization questions. So there are all sorts of questions about devices, and Tunbridge highlighted many of these, which is, in what way do we actually follow up once a device has been implanted or whatever, to ensure that it's working fit for purpose, etc., long before the thing, if you like, goes bad, proves to be wrong. And I think for me, the real challenge and opportunity for the MHRA is, how do we make this, if you like, data collection, if I put it at its most basic, of devices, actually do more than just sit there as a database. And it seems to me the only way that that can happen is that there is some new thinking and some new common working between the MHRA and the NHS and the clinical commissioning groups and the hospital foundation trusts. Because the reality is, unless we actually record when somebody goes to a GP or goes into A&E, what's happened with their hip replacement, what's wrong with their catheter, what exactly is wrong? Because unless we start recording this and recording the history of any individual device, we're not going to be able to ensure safety. We're not going to be able, before things go really badly wrong for a lot of people, get devices which are malfunctioning out. And it seems to me there's also a role for and importance for the use of this data at the other end of this ecosystem, because there is the piece about developing these new devices, and actually the data that is being collected by the MHRA and the post-market information ought to feed back in a perfect feedback loop to the people who are developing new devices, in whatever form they might be. So the next lot of hip joints actually are devised in a completely different, more effective way, which gives them greater sustainability and a better outcome for the individual patient. Now, the same will be true, I'm sure, of catheters and all sorts of other devices. But it seems to me, a feedback loop, and Graeme and the MHRA are in the middle of it. And it seems to me not to join it up with, if you like, the data gathering and collection and sharing that goes on at the research end in universities and hospitals, along with the patient outcome data, which needs to be collected and currently isn't as systematically as it should. We are going to miss a real opportunity and sub-optimize. To get that right, to me, is nirvana. So no pressure, Graeme, but I think others listening today have an equal role to play.
Yeah, fascinating. I think the regulatory approach between commodity type products such as leg bags and insertable in the body type products is a yawning difference. And I'm sure, Peter, let's have a manufacturer's perspective on some of those comments, and then we'll come back to Graeme to respond and to pick up on another question in the chat. But Peter, you've been quiet for a while.
Well, Chris, I've been quiet because to a certain extent, I'm out of my depth. And I'm out of my depth from the point of view that my life has been really spent around part 9 of the drug tariff with devices that predominantly are, as I described them previously, commodity devices. So a lot of the medical device regulations that apply to the more complex and sophisticated and perhaps indwelling devices, I have no experience of. So I feel that I can talk authentically about those items with which I've been working for the past 40, 50 years. But I don't know anything about replacement hips or replacement knees, other than the fact that I've been the beneficiary of a replacement knee. And I'm delighted that Graeme and his colleagues have provided such a wonderful device, which has allowed me to play 18 holes again. I take comfort from the enthusiasm that Graeme shows in his position as director of MHRA. And as a manufacturer, I think, rest assured that so long as we've got guys in place like that, who are open and transparent, then the future bodes well.
Good stuff. And Anne-Marie also touched on the Tunbridge review, which fed into the legislation we're talking about. Perhaps not very welcomely from the government's point of view, as I wrote on Conservative Home in several columns while the bill was going through, because I was a great backer of Julia, whom I've known for many years. Graeme, Anne-Marie wants you to deliver Nirvana, and we also have a more question about elaborating on the transitional period post-June 2023, including labelling. Can you tie up those two rather different subjects?
They are, aren't they? I could not agree more with what Anne-Marie said about the need to make sure, and hopefully it goes back to what I said earlier about the fact that you don't want regulation being this standalone pillar that has no regard to anything else. The nirvana that I see is that a manufacturer registers through with the MHRA, includes their UDI of their products through with that. We then provide that master data in a completely open, transparent way to anyone that wants to get it, with some key information about the products, some of which will be available to the public, some of which will be kept internally. But then that feeds through and provides the master data then, so that when you start to do some of those tracking of, let's include UDI in the patient record, so that we can, so we can very clearly against the patient put which product they've used through the UDI. You then use the master data to make those linkages, and we are having those conversations with NHS Digital, with NHSX in particular. We've done some proof of concept work on mesh to see, how can this work? How can you make? And it starts to stand together, and you look at it and you think, actually, maybe Nirvana isn't so far off. It will take time. It is difficult. It is complicated. This involves, digitization of the NHS and all those things that amongst the other challenges, kind of seemingly imponderable challenges that never quite cracked. But as I said, I think some stars are aligning there. Looking at the transitional provisions, I think that the point that Kate is making is that June 2023 is but 2 years, 2 months away. And for a manufacturer thinking about saying, from a basic sense, I need to change the CE mark for a UKCA mark. I need to change potentially the name of the authorized rep on the pack to a UK responsible. I need to do all of these things. 2 years, 2 months, even if you knew what the answer was now, is a challenging timescale. Realistically, it's going to be, when you think about the timescales, we'll have to consult later this year. We'll have to write legislation that probably come through to Parliament early next year, I'd say. So when you put those timescales together, you can see that actually certainty on what's going to happen after June 2023 is only going to be possible probably early next year. So then the approach that we'll have to take, and let's go back and embrace the flexibility, is one to say, well, we're not, crikey, if there's anything that we're not going to do, is not going to repeat the mistakes of the MDR and the IVDR, which is to say, here's a giant leap that you've got to make, and we're going to ignore anyone saying there's a problem, it's too difficult, until you get to just before the leap and then say, oh, we'll push it back a year. What we want to do is if you think about the world post June 2023, it's almost like this kind of a stepwise progression to a new system, focusing on where do we think are the important areas where a kind of a boutique, a smaller regulator like the MHRA really wants to focus its efforts on. Where are the important patient safety issues? Where can we do things that really improve things for patients, and actually kind of leave a lot of the other stuff to churn through and work through over time. But frankly, forcing manufacturers to do things to ridiculous timescales isn't in anyone's interest. I don't think anyone gains anything from that. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to listen very carefully when we do consult. So this is my plea to people to give us information, give us data, tell us what you need to do, and we'll then factor that into our planning, so that when we do come forward with, well, here's what the world looks like, it's one where everyone goes, actually, yeah, that's sensible, that makes sense, we can achieve that, and I get why they're doing it that way, because they're focusing on the important things.
Thanks for that, Graeme. Anne-Marie, as well as responding to that, can I lay an open question down to you as well, as one of the few parliamentarians who actually gets it in terms of the regulation and the approach to medical devices. There are a few other experts around, but they're few and far between. There are a lot of, however, users of products, but they tend to only know about the one that they've got, as Peter mentioned. But interesting. So we've got the Queen's Speech coming up. We've had the white paper. There's going to be a bill. The bill will be introduced, no doubt, fairly promptly, so they can get some second reading in perhaps before the summer recess. But we're going to have plenty of time to lobby on this piece of legislation. What do you want to take out? What do you want to tweak? What do you want to put in that isn't there? What's on your agenda as an expert on these in terms of legislation and policy?
Well, that's very flattering, Chris. Thank you. In terms of everything Graeme said, I'm not sure I could put anything any better. And I think, as we all say, we're all delighted to hear his enthusiasm. I think the only postscript I might add, but it's one I know he is well aware of, is that whether you're talking about medicines or devices, they're international, they're not national. And increasingly, however we do things, we have to look at that in an international context, in part to meet the concerns that Peter raised right at the start. And so with the system and the data that we've been talking about, and the collection of information, if we think about it, many of these devices are going to be used not just in the UK, and they're not just going to be manufactured in the UK, but it's all over the world. So pretty mission critical to all of this is that the international dimension is baked into domestic policy making, which probably sounds countercultural, but actually that has to be the way forward. So I think that would be my comment on that. With regard to your question, Chris, as to what I would like to see and what I'm going to say, well, I'm in the process, I think you're aware, through the APPG that I chair, or the call for written evidence. And the last part, which will be going out this week, is specifically looking at what we would like to see in legislation around health and care that, frankly, is missing in the white paper and is not there in sufficient detail in the Medicines and Medical Devices Act, as far as we're talking about medicines and devices rather than hospitals, nurses, and commissioning systems. As a result of that, then, Chris, hold your breath. I shall be listening to see what many people, whether it's the innovators themselves, whether it's the regulators, the manufacturers, whether or not it's individuals within the hospital world, the academic health network. So it seems to me that without all of that input, it would be probably unwise and uninformed of me to say, this is absolutely what we want. But if you want big picture, I think for me, message number one, medicines and devices has to be integrated in our whole concept and journey in how we develop the delivery of good health and care. You cannot do the three things that the government has set out it wants to do. It's almost triple lock, if you like, in the white paper, without properly integrating medicines and devices in it. So for me, that will be the primary ask. The secondary ask is going to be then to look at this piece by piece. This particular white paper and the Health and Care Act are focused very much on the NHS. And the NHS and better integration between primary, secondary, and indeed across into social care is crucial. But integration has to be across the whole piece. And we need to look at the patient journey, and the patient has to be at the center of this, to look at where these four forces, whether we're talking health, care, medicines, devices, where do they come together? And whenever we legislate, let us ensure what the implications are for all of those four pieces of input, if you like, into an individual's health outcome. So for me, looking then at commissioning, which I don't think has been looked at for years, would be my third ask, because unless we ensure we commission across the piece in a much more constructive way, recognizing the real challenges of the new technologies, and in some cases, the small population bases that are going to benefit from them, which gives rise to a whole number of questions around access. Also, it gives rise to some big questions about pricing. So my fourth ask is going to be, we need to look again at how, as a country, we price and cost and charge, if you like, for our medicines and devices. Now, I know that's asking a lot, and many will be throwing their arms up saying, Emery, how can you possibly do that? And I would say, where we are now, the cost of medicines and devices is growing exponentially. If you look at the cost of AI, it's through the roof. We cannot honestly sit here and expect the existing mechanisms through NICE to be in any way fit for purpose for that. And the government has to sit down and have a really hard think with a cold towel around its head as to how going forwards we are going to have a better system actually to afford the things which are coming down the line, which will make such a huge difference to people's lives. So, Chris, those are my four asks. I'm sure they will develop further once I get the response to this call for written evidence.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. I'm sure that I'll be in touch about your four asks. They sound absolutely excellent. I've got one very quick question. 30-second answer from Graeme has just come through when he was talking about positioning the MHRA as a world leader. What are you going to have to do in the digital tech area to make that a reality?
I think there are lots of things we can do, and in 30 seconds it's difficult. I think partly watch this space. We're developing some interesting proposals in this area. I think a couple of quick thoughts are, one is to crack the AI question and really get to the heart of that, because everyone's asking it. There's lots of hype, there's lots of bluster, and actually to get down some brass tacks on that will be really important, really interesting, and talk about actually how does regulation in the space actually work in real life, and use some examples and do it that way. I'm almost certain that will involve some sandboxing, prototyping, whatever you want to call it. I'm sure we'll be developing that sort of thing. I think the other thing is the thinking about the wider deployment question is how can we make sure that regulation yet again doesn't sit in that silo, and that we think about deployment in the context of how that software is being used, so that the risks attached to that are very different when it's being used in someone's hands on their smartphone versus deployment in NHS, and making sure regulation can be a bit smarter and think about those different routes to how it's being used. That's a very quick snippet.
Graeme, thank you. Peter, thank you. Anne-Marie, I now know why NICE signed up in such large numbers for this event today. I was a little unclear why half their staff appeared to be registering for our event, but it's been a fascinating discussion. I say to the panel, it really was fascinating and infusing discussion. And what could have been a very technical and dry subject, you have a bigger picture, a bigger vision, And I'm sure that we will all benefit from that as an industry, as policymakers, and above all, as patients who are going to be using these products, needing this innovation in the future. It's clear that there are other events to be done off the back of this one that look at some of these areas in more detail, perhaps one on digitech and AI in the sector, perhaps one on medicines, perhaps one more on products, and so on, and certainly to mark the key stages of the legislation as it goes through from white paper to Queen's speech, publication, and to that first crucial second reading debate when the headline issues will be argued out for the first time on the floor of the House of Commons. And hopefully it will be on the floor of the House of Commons again in the near future. Thank you all for being present. Thank you to our audience. And I look forward to seeing you all in the next cartoon. Thank you.